Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Our topic for tonight is changes following a likely Russian victory in Ukraine, part 10. I'll be joined in a few minutes by Dee Peers, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends, and I believe she will be here in just a minute. And following her in another 10 minutes will be the peace activist, specifically Madelyn Hoffman, who will be joining us from Colombia, where she has taken her peace activism of many years from New Jersey to Colombia. She'll be joining us for the discussion, but she needs a few minutes. And there's Dee.
Hello, good to see you.
I took the liberty of introducing you, Dee.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm happy to be here.
And I am happy you are here. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Okay, so tonight, what I wanted to talk about was changes going on in Latin America or in the relations of the United States to Latin America that may be accelerated by a Russian victory in Ukraine. Last week we began to talk about that because we were considering that the United States was likely to lose a considerable amount of status, okay, because as the main backer for the NATO effort to conduct and win that particular war, uh, it would reflect really badly on us if there were a Russian victory, because it would prove to the world that we didn't have the military power to actually prevent that. Now, some would say, of course, that, well, we did have the military power if we wanted to begin to nuke people. But I think the object of the game is to win without having to nuke people. Because if you nuke people, they will nuke you, and none of us will survive.
Mm-hmm.
So the objective for the United States has always been to use its nuclear deterrent as just that. Of course, that could not work in preventing the Russians from responding to the US and NATO attempt to surround them and to immediately threaten them with hostile forces. So once the Russians began to fight back and began to prove that they had the conventional military power to stop the collective West, then you have a situation where it's looking increasingly like the collective West is just going to lose this particular conflict. The effort to use economic sanctions, okay, as a critical weapon did not work. Okay, it appears that the Russians have grown stronger the longer we apply the economic sanctions to them.
Mm-hmm.
So NATO is going to come out of this looking like a loser. the United States is going to come out of it also looking like a loser. And the question for tonight is, what will the impact be on Latin America and the relations of the United States to Latin America? It was interesting this week, okay, on one of the programs that Ben Norton had this week. He considered the ideas of some of the Republicans in Congress who are increasingly saying that what we need to do next is to invade Mexico,
Yes, I saw that.
okay, and bring the cartels to justice, the criminal cartels to justice. There was a very strong response to these silly suggestions.
Because they're nationalizing everything over there.
They are nationalizing things over there, and the Republicans don't like it. The
Yeah, but especially lithium and everything else.
owners don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we don't particularly care for the renationalization of oil, and we don't care for the renationalization, okay, of lithium that's going on down there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the response of Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, otherwise known as AMLO, here and also there, has been very strong and very emphatic,
Mm-hmm.
asserting that Mexico is not a colony of the United States, that it is independent and that it is sovereign.
Correct.
And he provided a great speech, okay, in the Zocalo, which is at the center of Mexico City, where he stated this again and again in no uncertain terms. And he made clear, okay, that any movements
Mm-hmm.
of troops by the United States into Mexico would be met with self-defense force. And as Sherry Wise says in the comments, AMLO is fired up. He certainly was fired up in that speech. And he has no intention of allowing the United States to interfere in the internal affairs, okay, of Mexico and of its domestic policies, whether or not those domestic policies are damaging the interests of U.S. Corporations. And Ben Norton called attention to the historical parallels between the situation AMLO is facing right now and the situation that was faced by Lázaro Cárdenas, the FDR, okay, of Mexico, who, okay, in the 1930s ran Mexico, if I recall my dates correctly, from 1936 to 1942. He was famous for nationalizing the oil and for using the oil revenues to lift the state of the workers and peasants, okay, of Mexico. Uh, so AMLO, okay, expressed his feeling of continuity with the Mexican Revolution and the height of the Mexican Revolution in Cardenas's work. And he saw himself as a successor to Cardenas. and he expressed the kind of vision that Cardenas had. Uh, One of the reasons why he did that, I think, and one of the reasons why he felt he could do that, was because of the weakening position of the United States, as exemplified by the happenings in the Ukraine war, and the likelihood that that war was going to be lost. In other words, AMLO perceives that the U.S. is too busy in Ukraine to try to do anything in Mexico, whatever the insane statements coming out of the members of the Republican Party are. Uh, so I think this is one effect of what is going on in Ukraine that we can see right now. But I think that this spirit of independence, okay, and defiance is spreading throughout the whole of Latin America now, with more and more of the Latin American countries insisting on their sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
And I think increasingly that's going to be going on, and they will be making common cause, okay, with one another to tell the Colossus of the North to keep its hands off the domestic affairs, okay, of Latin America, which means they'll be on the lookout for the CIA, and they'll be on the lookout for other American agencies that try to stir up trouble for the new pink tide, okay, in Latin America. I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for the United States to overturn regimes there. Of course, this remains to be seen, but the movements of various countries, okay, of Latin America to affiliate with the BRICS nations now,
Mm-hmm.
and to begin to rely on alternative currency arrangements. That's another trend that is going to weaken the influence of the United States, okay, in Latin America. Uh, would you like to comment further on this, Dee? Okay, or you, Madelyn?
Well, all I know for sure, Joe, and I missed a little bit of the opening, is that Gustavo Petro in Colombia uh, rejected the construction of, or suspended the construction of an eighth military base here. So, yeah, I mean, I have never been able to say that I've lived in a country that has rejected the proposal for a military base, being from the U.S. as I am. So that was a big deal. Also, he and his government refused to send weapons to Ukraine. So that was a second way of saying, no, we are not going to do what the United States wants us to do just because they're asking us to do it. And then his whole relationship with the Cuban government, the Nicaraguan government, and the Venezuelan government. He's not been in office yet for a year. And, he very early on, August or September, he reestablished relationships with those three countries, despite U.S. objections. And when our good buddy, where's Waldo? Where's Juan Guaido? Where is he? When he tried to gain entrance into Colombia sent him packing. So he wound up in Miami, Florida. So I mean, even just I think those were four different actions that Petro has taken, that has basically said we want our own, we're not going to follow you just because you say so. And I've spoken to another person, an activist in Colombia, who said, it's not exactly what I thought, which was, people the different countries are running to join BRICS. It's more what you said, Joe, that people in Latin America are saying that they need to be given the power to choose their own direction and the way they want their government to go. Self-determination in the first degree. And so even that, can be seen as a revolutionary act. You say, we're not going to just do what you in the United States want us to do. So, I mean, for that alone, I'm glad I'm living here, and not in the belly of the beast, because I'm seeing governments stand up to the U.S. in ways that I wish the U.S. would, I and others in the peace movement in the U.S. have been clamoring for the U.S. to do, to no avail at this point. So, yeah, at least, the countries in Latin America, many of them are standing up and have their eyes wide open for the possibility of a coup or a coup attempt. And, really, really hypersensitive to corruption in their governments, and the need to root it out before it gets them into any trouble.
Okay, we have some comments from Sherry Wise, who says, AMLO is fired up, and then good for him. And then a few moments later, it is becoming more and more obvious how toxic we are. And then her last comment, Tony Blinken has hit the height of his incompetence. Okay, Sherry, if you'd like to join us, you're very welcome. The link is in the Facebook group. Okay, anyway, did you have any comments, Dee?
Yeah, I saw that today, what you were watching, and when it comes to Mexico, they're looking at, like you said, going back to nationalizing everything and taking care of their people. They've had enough of the corporate influence. There's also talk around about them interested in the possibility of joining BRICS. So the U.S. doesn't like any of this, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But Mexico has to take care of Mexico. The corporations have destroyed the country. Corporations destroy every place they go to. So I'm happy
They
with
destroy every place they go to unless they are tightly regulated by the governments, of these countries.
It's true. They have to be regulated.
Yes, they have to be regulated. Okay, but generally, of course, they refuse to be regulated, and so then they need to be thrown out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in Mexico, I remember the maquiladores, the area in between the U.S. and Mexico, kind of right on the border,
Yes.
and the regulation there is not that it's non-existent, but is way, way lower, way softer on corporations than the U.S., than in some U.S. states. But this is going back a ways, so I don't know if the U.S. has lowered its regulations as well to match up to what's going on below the border in Mexico. But it really, I remember seeing so much and reading so much about how those double standards were really affecting and impacting the workers in Mexico. Um, and I don't know exactly where it stands today, but it was
I don't
awful.
know where it stands either, but I have the impression that AMLO is starting to regulate them now and to raise the
Oh.
standards for those factories.
Mm-hmm.
Sherry says, sorry, I actually have to go, but good discussion. It seems there are a lot of changes going on, which is hopefully a good thing. Yes, I think what we had was not working, and we need to have these changes. And to my mind, it was inevitable that sooner or later the Latin American countries were going to insist on their sovereignty and the interests of their people, and were going to become interested in charting their own path. The BRICS nations, of course, and China, okay, are facilitating that, and they're offering financial incentives to get these companies involved. We, on the other hand, are scolding and threatening and saying, don't get involved with them. But this is becoming less and less successful. And it's more and more clear that we have to compete with BRICS if we intend to have the countries of Latin America become friendly with us again.
Mm.
If we want them as friends, we're going to have to stop allowing our corporations to oppress them and begin to make deals with them that are in the interests of their citizens and not just in the interests of our businesses. I think that is essential and that we have to start doing that. If we don't start to do that, we will have a hostile Latin America on our hands, from the lower tip of Argentina to the northernmost part, okay, of Mexico. And that will not be a good thing for us.
No, the U.S. has to stop treating Latin America as its personal playground and a personal bank account. Um, and I mean, this has been going on in Latin America for hundreds of years, not with the US, obviously, but with the Spanish and the conquistadors. And, you know, they're basically looting the country and robbing it of a lot of its resources, starting with gold, enslaving some of the people, having very little respect for those who live here. And if you look carefully at the connections between Latin America and the United States today, the U.S. has its hands on so many things, and Joe Biden was the author of Plan Colombia, so which really was not beneficial to Colombia at all. And when I say beneficial, I mean agricultural. The agriculture, needs to be something where the resources, the places where the resources come from, whether it's mining or agriculture or whatever it is, that place has to be fairly compensated for having been the place that produces the fruit or the vegetables or the gold. I mean, and the gold, the South African company, Anglo Gold Ashanti, wants to build the world's largest or second largest gold mine right through the heart of Colombia, through 5 or 6 departments. And the government, the Colombian government, prior to Gustavo Petro, would say, yes, yes, come on. We just need business, you know. And just the more business, the more business, the better. But when you look at what that business would do and how it would cause damage to waterways and forests, the deforestation that would occur, all of that, you realize that it's not so simple. And it's, you know, this company wants all the benefits, but doesn't want to give benefits or respect to the people who would be hosting the gold mine. So it's been a long, long history of fighting and conflict. And as you probably know, Colombia is the place in the world with the highest assassination rate of its environmental leaders, community leaders, labor leaders, and the like. So,
Has that stopped now?
No. Has it slowed down? Maybe. I'm not 100% sure, but there's still a lot of concern about the levels of violence that exist. I also know that Petro and company, they're looking to create a complete peace, a full peace, and so they've been negotiating with the ELN, which is one of the more uh, they've used violence in the past as a group that has been trying to protect campesinos and others in the mountains and the hills. So there's an attempt, you know, but it all has to be tied together. It can't be, you know, just lay down your weapons and everything will be all right. It has to be lay down your weapons and we're going to rebuild this community, or we're going to, you know, listen to your concerns about specific things and we're going to address them. Because if not, you know, you give up your guns, you give up your weapons, leave yourself and others more vulnerable, and you don't receive anything in return. And so, I mean, I see what Robert Kaplan has written about Latin American countries solving their own problems, but I think it's irresponsible or narrow-minded to not realize that a lot of those problems are caused by the colonizer, and so something needs to give in order to address the overall problem. So social justice, poverty, hunger, environmental pollution, protection, deforestation, fracking, extracting resources from the ground, all of that has to be worked out together as a whole in order to benefit the Colombian people or the Brazilian people or whomever, because Colombia is second only to Brazil in terms of biodiversity per hectare. So, you know, there's a lot of valuable stuff to protect.
Where does the military stand in Colombia?
You mean, is it behind Gustavo Petro?
Yes. Is it behind Gustavo Petro?
Yes, it is. At least it is now. If you want to know how much is budgeted for the military, I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that. But the fact that Petro rejected an eighth military base is significant, because that, at least I shouldn't say rejected, he suspended that. That would be in the Pacific, in the northern part of the country. And but I also know he's contracted for some military weapons, like planes, a couple planes from the U.S. So one of the things that I need to do now that I'm here is to work to try to get a peace movement going here, an anti-militarism movement going here. Not me myself, but I've been approached to work with someone on that, and I'll need to do more research because I don't have the answers to those questions.
Okay. What do you hear about what's going on in Ecuador, and also Peru?
Well, Peru, Ecuador, I haven't heard much, and that's not because there isn't much going on. It's just it's not been something I've seen. But Peru, there is a movement growing within the U.S. and growing within Latin America to support Castillo, who was ousted by the coup.
Yes, I know
Um,
he was.
so there's been some pushback. There's been some, reaction to that, and people organizing in an international way um, to stand in solidarity with the people who were in the government. But again, the details I would need to check out, and I'd be glad to do so. I just don't have them at my fingertips.
Okay. Is there any move to reinstall Correa or somebody like him? Okay, in Ecuador.
Again, I can't answer that. Sorry. Some expert on Latin America, I am.
Well, I know you'll be gaining knowledge as you
Yeah,
stay there
yeah.
and
And this is,
study it. Uh, there is the news that Argentina and Brazil, okay, are collaborating on trying to develop a currency to be used for international trade, okay, in Latin
yes.
America. And that seems like another effort uh, that is designed to foster the independence and the sovereignty of the Latin American countries.
Yeah, and if you've read Eduardo Galeano's book, Open Veins of Latin America,
No,
um, he, he wrote that book, maybe 20 years ago. And in the very opening chapter, he talks about how there's no reason at all for people of Latin America to be going without food, to be hungry, to be living in poverty, because the resources that exist here should be enough to create a very um, comfortable living arrangement. There's so much. It really is ironic when there's so much water and then places that have none. It's not because there aren't the resources. It's because of how they're either distributed or extracted and taken out of the country.
yeah.
So yeah, with this kind of currency that's for Latin America alone would be a step in the right direction to keep the resources of the country in the countries. What a radical idea, right? Um,
Yes, we can probably expect that more and more deals will be made with the Chinese, okay, and Russians
mhm,
in order to facilitate the development, okay, of Latin America as part
mhm.
of their positive incentives program. Uh, I'm sure that's going to happen increasingly.
I'm
And the
sure you're right.
United States is going to be increasingly angry about that.
Yeah, I remember beginning of last year, I was in Honduras for the inauguration of Xiomara Castro, and it was in at the end of January of last year, so that would have been 2022, and there was a lot of speculation. Would Kamala Harris come to the inauguration or wouldn't she? And if she didn't come, who else would come in her stead? And she got a very chilly reception,
I'm sure.
very chilly. Yeah, and there was a guy, the previous president, whose name is escaping me. I'm losing my memory as I get older. Um,
Yeah, we're
but
all losing our memories as we get.
but the previous guy, see, there was 12 years. The coup in the U.S. backed coup in Honduras was 12 years prior to this inauguration. So that was 2022. That would put it at 2010 thereabouts. And the dictator who had been in power for those 12 years had just been kicked out, not a coup, but by elections in November of 2021. And the people in the crowd in the stadium that hadn't been used for quite some time, they said they were basically telling the two of them, Kamala Harris and this former dictator, to go back home to the U.S. Leave, go to the U.S. Go, go, go.
Basically,
Because
Yankee go home.
yes, exactly. I mean, he wasn't a Yankee, he was an Honduran dictator, but he had been in cahoots with the Yankee government. So I think people in Latin America are very astute about these things.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, there's so much beauty and so many resources here. I hope that what you're saying, Joe, turns out to be true.
Well, it seems logical that as the power of the United States wanes compared to other nations in the international system, as part of the emergence of a multipolar world, we're going to have to turn to dealing with people rather than forcing people to do what
Mm.
we want them to do. And that could be very good for us. Uh, uh, I mean, collaboration efforts with other
Mhm.
countries could turn out to be very rewarding and very satisfying and a really good way to live. We have to be brought to the water, okay, in
Mhm.
order for us to drink it. And I don't think we've been brought to the water yet. But this decrease in our worldwide influence may cause that. I hope so. The intervention of Robert Kennedy, okay, in
Mhm.
this situation is possibly significant. Okay, there are some things that are going on. Did you know his campaign manager is Dennis Kucinich?
No, I didn't know that. That's a great start.
Yeah, I guess I had read that somewhere earlier, okay, but
Mhm.
Lisa reminded me of that today,
Ah.
okay, in a text. She pointed out that he was the campaign manager. I found that very significant because uh, okay, it means that RFK, okay, is taking people into the front rank of his team
Mhm.
uh, who are the kind of people uh, that we ought to want in the front rank of his team. I've been paying very close attention to him lately,
To RFK or Dennis Kucinich?
To what's RFK.
Mhm.
In terms of the kinds of things he's saying in various interviews, okay, and podcasts. And in his podcasts, when it comes to the military situation, okay, in Ukraine, he's reflecting the views of Scott Ritter
Mhm.
and also Colonel McGregor, two colonels. Uh, okay, and they evidently like Kennedy.
Mhm.
It's not surprising to me that Scott Ritter likes him, but Doug McGregor is in many ways a very conservative individual who publishes in conservative circles. But he recently had an interview with RFK where he was referring to RFK as Sir.
Mhm.
He was making it very, very clear that he was in RFK's corner. Okay? And of course, Colonel McGregor is famous for thinking the Ukraine war never should have happened, that the Russians were boxed in,
Mhm.
that they're certain to win the war, okay, by the end of the summer, and that the United States has made a grave mistake in trying to surround Russia. Uh, he has a great lack of respect for the neocons who have been dominating foreign policy for so long. It was obvious from the interview that he was looking to Kennedy to do something about them, and that he thought that probably Kennedy was going to get a chance to do so because the support for Kennedy is really rocketing up.
Yeah, it is.
It's fast. In other words, the latest poll, which just looked at the favorable, unfavorable ratings of candidates, showed that Kennedy's favorable rating was up to 39%.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that too.
But just as important as that, okay, is his unfavorable rating was at 25%.
Mhm.
So he was at plus 14, okay, in the polls. The poll covered also many other people and candidates. Joe Biden, for example, was something like minus 14 as opposed to plus 14. But Kamala Harris, who has a favorable rating of 39%, okay, the same as Robert, but whose unfavorable rating is somewhere in the 40s. I think she's
Shoes.
-7 or something like that. Of course, there were minus ratings uh, in terms of the ratio of favorable to unfavorable,
Mhm.
substantial ones uh, for for Donald Trump and for Ron DeSantis
Mhm.
and for Nikki Haley and for other Republican hopefuls, Mike Pence. Uh, okay, they're all negative.
Right.
Very few people have a favorable unfavorable ratio that is weighted very heavily towards the favorable. And of course, couple that with the trend, which is the favorable rating for RFK is going up so fast,
Mhm.
makes you wonder how long the DNC is going to be able to face that kind of pressure. If the next round of polls shows another I don't know, 10-point increase or 14-point increase in his favorables for Robert Kennedy,
Mhm.
that's going to mean he'll be over 50%.
You mean you think the DNC will back down and have some debates during the primaries?
Well, I don't know where the breaking point is going to come,
Hmm.
but Robert Kennedy seems to be gaining support now very, very quickly. And the smears against him as an anti vaxxer don't appear to be working.
Hmm.
And the people who oppose him are mainly focusing on the anti vaxxer thing to try to undermine support for him.
He's talking about his choice and the fact of he goes to PubMed when it comes to research on different things. So it's they're trying to distort it. It's what they're basically doing. They use that term all the time when it comes to people. And a lot of people are not anti-vax. They choose that the safe vaccine. And a lot of people were told too that they can't get certain ones. It's something that almost like with the abortion issue. It's between you and your doctor.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, but I think that's what's happening. Okay. And the point is that they're not being successful in smearing him with something simple like that.
No,
So
they're
they're going
not.
to have to turn to something else. They're certainly about turning to something else, and they're using also very unfair tactics. Like in one appearance, they cut out a section of his interview and claimed that it was due to misinformation that he was spreading.
Oh.
Okay, but they didn't allow people to hear what he had to say and to make their own judgments about, whether he was spreading misinformation. Uh, I don't think that's working for them. Okay,
Well,
back
and
to Latin America, though.
he he also, let me say,
Sure.
I do think that he is bolstered by having the last name of Kennedy, and there's not a whole lot for those people who loved JFK, who loved Bobby Kennedy Sr., Robert Kennedy Sr. There's not a whole lot that's going to sway them away from from a Kennedy. But there is also, I am sure that a lot of what's happening with RFK Jr. is people are, you know, um, taken by his policies. It's a breath of fresh air. Something different that people really want. I'm gonna say goodnight. Um, I have to go.
Okay,
But
good night, Madeline.
I'm
Thank
going to do some research on Latin America so I can answer your questions better next time.
Okay, thank you, Madeline.
Well, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Madeline. It was great talking with you tonight.
Okay,
Okay.
I look forward to that.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay,
Good
bye.
night.
Okay, so Dee, should we take some of the comments now?
Sure.
Okay. So Robert says, of course, we've taken some of the comments already, but Robert says at 9:25, Latin American countries should solve their own problems, like getting rid of the drug cartels in Mexico and getting rid of MS-13 in El Salvador. So Steve Wolfbrand said hello at 9:30 and said MS-13 is in El Salvador because we deported them. He says, I know, I live in Los Angeles. That was very good, Steve. So, so Robert said, there shouldn't be people living in poverty on the entire planet. Yeah, I think we all feel that way. We know that that is not the case because of the errors and because of the actions of our governments that often do not have the public purpose behind them, but are representing special interests.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Hoofman says, Robert agreed there's plenty for everyone on this planet. I'm hoping for aliens to save us, laugh out loud. And he leaves a bunch of alien icons that I can't see too clearly from this interface.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Copeland says, I'm going to switch to the Green Party, as on some issues, the Democrats are just as bad as the Republicans. What I have to say to that is that, and you know this, but I'm just going to sing this song again. Uh, I think what is wrong with our system is the toxic money flowing through it. I think that that's much less of a problem with the Green Party. In fact, off the top of my head, I don't know of any Green Party people who are bought here in the United States. But in places where the Green Party has gotten some prominence, such as in Germany, for example, it's obvious that a lot of the Green Party people have been bought by the capitalists. So my point on that is that Green Party candidates are not necessarily immune to the effects of toxic money. They just don't get any of it now. So for a while, of course, it is safe to vote for them, but we always have to keep in mind what the individual candidates are doing when it comes to fundraising. Uh, we need to be voting for candidates who are only accepting small dollar donations. That's the key. People have to vote according to the rule, which I've been exhibiting here and in my other programs very frequently, so I'm not going to bring it up again. But what it amounts to is small dollar donations only. No other support is allowed. Robert Copeland says a lot of people I know in California don't support the Kamala Harris. That doesn't surprise me at all, because when she ran for president, she had very little support from Californians. Excuse me a second, I have to take a couple of pills. Robert says lots of people in the anti-vax, vax movement actually like to scare the public instead of educating the public. I think that's true, but I think that Bobby is trying to educate the public and not just scare people. Steve says Sabby just did a great show that covered RFK Jr. as the last topic. A must watch. I will certainly watch it, Steve. Um, Steve says, even I didn't know how anti establishment RFK Jr. is until I just watched Sabby. Well, as I said, I've been listening to more and more of the interviews and podcasts, okay, Bobby Kennedy, and I am beginning to realize that he is very anti establishment. I still think he has a weakness when it comes to deficits and debts, okay, and public finance. But I'm also interested in finding out who the chief economist is that he's relying on in his campaign. Uh, I'm hoping that his choice for that is going to be Jamie Galbraith. because, of course, his uncle and his father were close to John Kenneth Galbraith. And I think that there's at least a chance that Jamie will become the choice. If that happens, then Jamie is going to introduce RFK to the MMT School of Economics. And that's going to be a big help to him in his thinking through the faux problem, of debts and of the debt to GDP ratio. And the level of those two things is literally of no importance. The level of the deficit could be important. If policies are not followed to remove or contain the possibility of inflation when deficits are large. But the MMTers have been addressing that in lots of their research, and I think we know how to do it. We know how to contain inflation. I think we know how to conceptualize it, and we know how to conceptualize the causes. And I think that's something that the classical economists don't know much about. I think the MMTers have been studying inflation much more closely over the years, because the first objection they get to their views is, well, what about inflation? What about Weimar? What about Zimbabwe? And they've had to cope with those kinds of comments for more than 20 years now. So they've developed considerable knowledge of the causes of inflation. And those causes are not simply deficit spending. Robert Copeland says a lot of people don't even know of MMT. I completely agree with you, Robert. And a lot of them will continue not to know anything about it probably over the next 10 years. But the issue here is whether Robert Kennedy knows about it or will know about it shortly. And Robert Copeland says, Steve, I've seen a show that Kucinich has actually seen a UFO. Yeah, I've heard claims of that kind also. They were part. I'm not saying that Dennis did not see a UFO. He may well have seen one. What I am saying is that spreading that kind of news was a favorite tactic of the establishment types who have been trying to get rid of Dennis for the last 15 years or more. So we have to realize that too. So, I've been on, or we have been on now
Yes.
For very close to an hour. And so I think it's time to say goodnight. We've gone through all the comments. I think we've covered the Latin American situation now pretty well. And I think we can move on to other impacts for next week. Steve Wolfbrand points out correctly, Harry Reid was a big UFO guy. Well, he came from an area of the country where more of the UFOs were seen. By the way, Bonnie, is a UFO person herself, having seen some UFOs. So I am not one to dismiss the UFO experience.
Me neither.
Yeah,
because people know what they see.
They do know what they see. And a lot of people have seen a lot of stuff.
Yes.
And we know a lot of the UFO stuff is still classified by the government. And a lot of us have to believe that that's a lot of smoke. And where there's smoke, there's fire.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and if the government wants to dispel the fire, the easiest way is to make things transparent.
That's true.
And if they won't do it, then they're to blame for people thinking things that the government is telling us, okay, are not so. Robert says Area 51 is in Harry Reid state of Nevada. Steve Wolfbrand says that UFO research is a hobby of mine. So, yeah, there are UFO experiences. So, good night, everyone. I'll be back tomorrow with the Dump the Corruption show. We're starting to take on the Freedom Caucus members to see if their pattern of fundraising is any different from the regular Republicans. And so for a while, we'll be doing that on Wednesdays and Fridays. So within, 3 weeks, I guess we should be finished with that in 2.5 weeks because we have 2 shows per week. And then we'll go on to more specific issues involving Dump the Corruption, which should be even more interesting than our shows so far, because we'll be talking about individual people and what their fundraising has to do with their positions, okay, in Congress.
Yes, and Robert brought up a good point. We've discussed this before, but Greg should be on when you do Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yes, he should be. And we will endeavor to get him on when we do Marjorie Taylor Greene. Of course, he's part of our gang,
Yes, he is.
so he gets the StreamYard links and he can come in, okay, at any time. But we'll make a special effort to get him in when we do the show that contains Marjorie Taylor Greene, which could be tomorrow, I guess. I haven't really thought that through, but I will be thinking that through very soon. So good night, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. We had fun. We hope that you had fun too. Thank you, Dee.
Oh, you're welcome. And if you get a chance, please buy Joe a coffee.
Oh, yeah, please do buy me a coffee and please do go to my Patreon account. Okay, I will greatly appreciate that. The truth is, I am getting more and more in need of having a viable stream when it comes to greater financial viability. I don't have that now, and it's beginning to become a problem. So please do occasionally think about that and help out if you can afford to do so. For now, good night. And we'll be seeing you again with a show tomorrow. And I'm sure Dee will have a show of her own at 8 o'clock tomorrow.
Yes, I will.
That I will be joining.
Sounds great to me. We'll see y'all tomorrow.
Okay, bye.
Bye.